that sincerity is what people consider to be honest. And it's a real problem because, of course, you cannot run a democracy without having some connection to reality. And that gets lost if you have these honest liars.
Hello, friends. You're listening to Agent 001, the podcast where technology meets society, the digital meets the real, and our things meets the data about them. I'm your host, Inoculate, and today we're doing something very special. I'm joined by guest host and journalist Maria Cheresheva, and we're recording from Sofia during the Ratio Forum, an event that brings together some of the sharpest minds working at the intersection of science, society, and technology. Our guest today is one of those minds, Professor Stephan Lewandowsky. He's a cognitive scientist at the University of Bristol. His work explores the friction points between the way human cognition works and the way our online information systems are designed. And in that friction, a lot of damage is happening to trust, to democracy, and to our ability to agree on basic facts. Professor Lewandowsky has spent decades unpacking why misinformation spreads, how conspiracy theories take root, and what can be done about it, from fact-checking and psychological inoculation to better tech policy and education. His research is not only widely published, but also widely applied, helping shape digital legislation in the EU level and informing responses to disinformation around the world. So today we are asking some big questions. Who are the honest liars? Why do some lies become mainstream narratives? Can we build psychological firewalls like we do in cybersecurity? And are today's kids growing to be better equipped than their grandparents to tell signal from noise? Before we get into it, let's thank our sponsor, Graphwise, who built cutting-edge technology enabling AI to work with real-world data. Be sure to check their website to learn more. Now, let's go to the episode.
So, Stephan, your lecture at the Ratio Forum was, it had quite an interesting title, and I'm provoked to ask, what do you mean by honest liars?
Yes, well, that's what I've been spending a lot of time on over the last few years. And what triggered this is that Donald Trump, who is, by all accounts, a very competent liar, is considered to be honest by his Republican supporters. And so I looked at these data showing on the one hand how often he's disseminating misinformation and on the other hand how Republicans view him. I thought, how can a serial liar be considered honest? And I think the answer is that honesty has two aspects to it. On the one hand, you have to be accurate. That's just part of being honest. On the other hand, honesty also reflects sincerity. And by that, I mean how authentically and sincerely you express your beliefs. If you're not holding back, if you're right out there and telling people exactly how you feel, that's being sincere. And what I think is going on is that Donald Trump is being considered honest because he is sincere. He may say, the earth is flat, so he's completely wrong. But he says it in a way that conveys his belief in that statement in the moment. And I think that sincerity is what people consider to be honest. And it's a real problem because, of course, you cannot run a democracy without having some connection to reality. And that gets lost if you have these honest liars.
And how do you approach this from an academic perspective? How do you measure this?
Yeah, okay, that's a very interesting question. Well, the way we measure it is through big data analyses of text. We're using text as data, and we're running computer programs that tell us whether a text is based on sincerity or accuracy as an approach to honesty. Now, let me explain that in a bit more detail. So, the way we did this was to first create dictionaries of words that we thought were capturing this aspect of honesty as sincerity. That's words like believe, belief, guess, intuition, gut feeling, common sense. All those words are hinting at this intuitive, sincerity-driven aspect of honesty. And then other words like data, fact, evidence, that's hinting at a more fact-based approach to honesty. And we then validated those dictionaries by asking people. It's actually very easy to explain to people what we mean. Honesty is sincerity. Honesty is accuracy. Here's a word. How much is it about sincerity? How much is it about honesty? And so the dictionaries reflect what people think about these two notions of honesty. And then we turn these, this is where it gets to be really funky and technical and geeky, but we turn these words, these dictionaries, into numbers, into numeric representations that capture the meaning of the entire dictionary in a series of numbers. And we can do exactly the same thing with the speech we're interested in, the text we're interested in. And then we compare the two, and we can look at the similarity between our dictionaries and political speech. And we've done this in, many different contexts. So let me tell you about two. The first thing we did was to look at all the tweets by members of the American Congress over a 6-year period, 2016 to 2022, thereabouts. And that's like over 1 million tweets, probably like around 1.6 million, if I remember correctly. And each tweet we can now capture through a number that tells us how similar it is to this sincerity-based expression of honesty, which we call belief speaking, and this other accuracy-based idea of honesty, which we call fact speaking. And then when we look at this, we find that the more a tweet engages fact speaking, that is accuracy, the more likely it is that that tweet is linking to a high-quality newspaper article. So all the tweets tend to contain links. The congressmen say, hey, look at this paper here. And so we look at the links, we look at the quality of the news. The more fact speaking there is, the higher the quality. Now, with belief speaking, it's the exact opposite. The more a tweet expresses belief speaking, the worse the quality of the news being shared. And that effect is particularly large for Republicans, far larger than it is for Democrats. So if you have a belief-speaking Republican, there's a high probability that the information they're pointing to is not very good.
But belief is also related to emotion,
yes,
I guess. And this is what works in the landscape that we are all living in. But I doubt that actually the sources of those tweets, all of them are speaking out of authentic belief. The Republicans, there are many reasonable people there. And I believe that in one of your other speech that I listened to, you were saying that this pretty much changed a lot from the first Trump mandate to the second one. So can we actually conclude that they found out that this works and they started employing it as a political strategy?
Well, actually, it goes back further than that. We've now done an analysis of congressional speeches. So we went from the tweets to the speeches in Congress, and we went back 140 years to the middle of the 19th century, and we looked at the same pattern for all the speeches. And it turns out when you do that, then you find that since the mid-1970s, around 1976, there's been a steep decline in the balance of congressional speeches from evidence-based language to intuition-based language. So from fact-speaking to belief-speaking, a very steep decline over the last, whatever that is now, almost, 50 years. So it goes back much further than Donald Trump. In fact, if you want to identify a person linked to this tipping point where facts began to matter less, that was Ronald Reagan.
It's no coincidence that he came from TV, right?
He came from TV, and movies, and he was the first politician who used humor and intuition and belief speaking as a weapon against his opponent. I remember him debating Jimmy Carter, and there was a famous line when Ronald Reagan said, there you go again with your facts. Something like that. That's, I'm paraphrasing. But, and the moment you do that, of course, you're changing political discourse entirely. And I think Ronald Reagan was a pioneer in doing that. And then, as you said, it works. It works to be emotion grabbing, to be outrage evoking. If you're a politician and you want to, you're trying to undermine democracy. Let's be frank about this, which is what these people are trying to do. The best way to do that is to whip people up into hatred and outrage against anyone, immigrants, women, trans people, what you name it. Just make them outraged, and then you can do whatever you want with those people.
And is it the same patterns that you see in Europe or all over the world, or is this more specific to the USA? I heard in the interview that you did for the Bulgarian national television, you spoke about Australia, that they are lying a lot less there.
Yes.
And is it the same in Europe? Do you have any observations?
Okay, yeah, it's a very good question. We have looked at the German Parliament and the Italian Parliament using the same analysis that we applied to
Can I make a prediction?
Well, what's your prediction? Tell me.
Italians are lying much more than the Germans.
Right. Well, in this case...
Now prejudice.
Okay. In this case,
curious.
that's okay. I can answer that, but let me first tell you about the parliamentary speeches, because in that case, we didn't look at the accuracy in the speeches. We had other outcome measures. But what we find for both Italy and Germany is that since World War II, it has remained quite stable, even in recent times. And so the balance is more towards fact speaking than belief speaking in both of those countries. Now, our analysis, I think, ended, I'm not sure now exactly, but a few years ago. So we didn't capture the last 2 or 3 years because you got to draw a line somewhere, and the project goes on and the data stay the same. So there may have been a shift over the last couple of years, but short of that, it's been stable, unlike the United States. But you asked me about lying. I can answer that, not for Italians, but for Germans. In one of our papers, we looked at the US, the UK, and Germany on Twitter. And we evaluated the quality of information being shared by members of Congress, members of Parliament in the UK, and members of Parliament in Germany. And we broke it down by party. And what we find is that in Europe, politicians are surprisingly good. In Germany, all mainstream parties, the vast majority of tweets by parliamentarians is pointing to high-quality sources, regardless of whether they're on the left, the center, or green, or conservative. Now, there are 2 exceptions. There's a huge exception on the far right, AFD.
AFD, yeah.
AFD, precisely. Most of their stuff is nonsense. And there's the far left, the left party, which is a little more mixed, but is also sharing a lot of low-quality sources, more so than the mainstream party. So the answer to your question is, do German politicians lie? Well, if we take that as an indication, the answer is that the mainstream parties are pretty good.
What about the UK? Because we have Brexit. So during the period of your studies, did you study the Brexit period, or it was after that when they've learned their lessons?
I believe it was after the Brexit period. And again, politicians there were found to be pretty accurate, both Labour and Conservatives. In the UK, a lot of the misinformation during Brexit, excuse me, was not spread by parliamentarians, but by people outside. So our analysis wouldn't have picked that up. And I also think that it was probably that we started the collection after the Brexit, after the referendum. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, of course, in the lead up to the referendum, the Leave campaign was just, spreading one falsehood after the other. But they got away with it.
Yeah. And doing nothing to prevent it, even if you say that, I mean, the outright lies did not come from the politicians themselves, they jumped on the bandwagon.
Depends on who you include as being a politician. I mean, somebody
Farage,
of course,
yeah.
If you count him as a politician, which I think you should, then he was lying every time his lips are moving, and he still does. And that is fascinating that there's been no accountability of that, because he is still doing extremely well in the polls at the moment.
Still isn't. They still aren't asking him. What about Brexit?
I know. And this is, it's somewhat inexplicable to me, let's put it that way, without, resorting to political explanations.
Well, maybe this is linked to another phenomenon that you are talking about in your other interviews about the attention economy.
Yes.
Does it create the grounds where actually, outright lying could be taken as something acceptable?
Let me add some more to the question. All of the speech and communication is mediated by technology. We kind of hinted at that Ronald Reagan was the first person who comes from TV. Now we would have a first politician, maybe we haven't, who comes from social media. I don't know if we have
we have MEPs. In the European Parliament, there are people who have never voted. There was this guy from Cyprus who is a TikTok influencer, and he said that he has never voted. He has never participated in the political process.
He was
elected because he's a superstar. There are several of them. There was a makeup influencer.
Well, Nigel Farage was doing exactly the same thing. He would just use the European Parliament as a platform to give his speeches. RT would put them, Russia Today would broadcast them and put them on YouTube, and he was out of Parliament 10 minutes later.
This is exactly what they're doing here in Bulgaria. They're using the National Assembly basically as a podcast studio, like
exactly.
we're doing right now.
Exactly.
They're producing sound bites which are not intended for the people in the hall. They're intended for their base and for their
precisely. And then they put it on social media, and then it goes from there. Yes.
And you need an emotional one, right? You wouldn't put like a really decent speech, fact-based.
Well,
it wouldn't perform well in TikTok.
And that is the problem with social media. And as you were hinting at already, the attention economy. Attention economy means that whenever something is free online for you, then you are the product being sold. It's either your data or your attention. And on Facebook, for example, anything you do on Facebook, the time you spend there is being sold to advertisers. And the advertisers are showing you commercials or ads on Facebook. And that's how the economy works. And so basically you are the product. And to keep you on the platform, the best way to do that is to amp up the outrage, because people can't help but stay hooked on outrage, on anxiety-provoking information. If people drive past a car accident and they rubberneck. They look at this terrible thing, even though they know they shouldn't. But our human attention is drawn to things that are frightening, anxiety-provoking, outrage-evoking, which makes sense if you think about where we come from, right? I mean, when we were living in caves and trees, it was very important to pay attention to the mammoth, that scared you and was about to eat you or trample you, and you had to run. So there is a good reason for attention to work that way. Unfortunately, evolution didn't know about Facebook.
Because it does the opposite. I mean, it gives you negative emotions. It basically destroys your mental health, and then at the same time, you're running towards it instead of away from it.
Precisely. It's precisely that. On the one hand, it is drawing you in. On the other hand, the long-term consequences of being drenched in outrage are obviously negative, both for society and most likely also for you yourself. You're right.
And do we have high-quality data on this? On the mental health impacts of this?
Okay, that's a very difficult. Yeah, it's a very difficult question. If you look, it depends on how you look at the data, and I don't think that issue has been resolved yet. If you look at data in the aggregate, populations of teenagers, so like all of the UK, then the influence of social media on mental health is very difficult to detect. And in fact, most of the time, you don't find it. However, it is quite clear that there are individual instances where social media has played a very powerful role in impacting individuals' mental health. And the difficulty is that it is very difficult to pick up these cases ahead of time, until something has happened, like a suicide or hospitalization or major depression. So it's very hard to pick up before then. And once you pick it up, it's also very difficult to be sure of what caused it. But there's enough for me to be concerned about that, definitely.
the sound is helping us amplify the pressure.
Let me close the door.
And of course, the next big question is who benefits from all of that? I mean, of course, the companies, they need to advertise, they need to take advantage of this situation.
Of course.
But, and also the politicians that are exploiting this.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't help asking myself all the time, where does it end somewhere, this?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. I mean, it ends wherever we let it end as a society or as a global community. I mean, it's not like that these are earthquakes or tsunamis or other natural events. These are human design products that have implications for society. Now, in a democracy, presumably, you can pass legislation that is dealing with this problem to the extent that it is a problem. And of course, you see, social media also has a lot of positives. I'm not a person who says social media are bad and we should, ban them or get rid of them or whatever. No, I mean, I spend a lot of time on social media. I'm on Blue Sky. I find it very informative, very entertaining sometimes. And I communicate to, people around the world using social media. So they're positives. And what we have to do is we have to find a balance. And at the moment, I think the balance is wrong. And in fact, if you think about what we have now, which is basically an ecology in which the information diet of billions of people around the world is determined by 15 people in Silicon Valley. Now, there's no way that we would have let those 15 guys design this if we had known what they were doing. Okay, if somebody 30 years ago had said, I have an idea. My name is Mark Zuckerberg. I'm going to now develop this machine that sells your attention to everybody. I'll make sure you're all outraged and angry all the time. I'll polarize society, blah, blah, blah.
That's not what they were thinking.
No, they weren't thinking it.
Yeah, it wasn't their idea either.
No, exactly. But we have to play the counterfactual to realize what has really gone wrong. Because if somebody had designed the system as we have it now, no one would have let them do that. Even in America, people would have said, what? Are you crazy? No, you can't do that.
It's actually quite ironic now with Gen AI, a powerful AI. Everybody's talking about risks. And the risk is, okay, well, we shouldn't give it our data. We should have it transparent. We shouldn't give it the power to make decisions about ourselves. Yeah, but we did that already 10 years ago with these algorithms. We already gave them all. It's the same AI.
Yes.
It's as smart or even smarter as ChatGPT.
Yes. Well, I'm not so sure about,
the Facebook one is
the algorithms are amazingly really good. Yeah. And they also, again, it's a double-edged sword. They also do good. For example, if I go on Amazon and I buy something, then it tells me at the bottom of the screen, it suggests other things I might want to buy. Oh, man.
That's the only way I shop. Now, when I want something, I go, I look at, I find one or two examples, then I wait one day. And then the next day, it's amazing. It shows me everything I need to know about the particular kind of product.
Exactly. And even while you're there online, you get the suggestions at the bottom. And I think they're incredibly good. They're really something I like. So, and so in terms of satisfying my preferences, they work extremely well. And honestly, I don't think there's any harm in that.
Here comes the moment for me to thank YouTube for today. It suggested me a band called Desperate Journalist.
Very good.
And it was a very good band, and now it's on my list.
Fantastic. There you go. And that's an example of algorithms actually doing a good job. But the flip side is that they can also show us stuff that the algorithm has figured out we like, but that is really bad for society. They can, and YouTube in particular, can do that and has done it demonstrably in the past at least, that it is leading people towards more and more extreme political content. And that, of course, is problematic for society. And so what we have to do is we have to draw a dividing line between what's permissible and what's not permissible for algorithms. And we have to get them under public control. And at the moment, that's not happening. Now, in the European Union, There are baby steps in that direction. There is the ECAT, the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency in Seville in Spain. And that is working on developing accountability of the platform algorithms within the legal umbrella of the Digital Services Act. So that's a good thing. But we need a lot more than that.
And of course, after Trump was elected, we saw the U-turn of these tech entrepreneurs, the tech bros, so-called, and they shifted very quickly their political views. And I think with some of them, it's authentic. I think they've fallen into their own trap, which is quite interesting to observe with Musk, Elon Musk, of course, but also Mark Zuckerberg. I think that his transformation is quite authentic now.
Possibly, although it's also very convenient, right?
But it would be interesting to watch from psychological perspective. I mean, the meltdown of one of the guys.
With Musk, a colleague of mine, Sander van der Linden at Cambridge, he has argued on social media that Musk is a victim of his own platform.
I was going to say that.
Exactly.
He's on X a lot, and he was getting pulled down into the rabbit hole. But you see, he's not just a victim. He's also an actor in this, because there's now evidence, pretty strong evidence, that the moment Musk endorsed Trump in August of last year, leading up to the election, the algorithm on X changed, and it suppressed Democrats and boosted Republicans. The evidence seems to be pretty clear that that's what he did.
I have the feeling, it's not evidence, I'm talking about feeling based on my Facebook feed, since actually Zuckerberg changed his attitude towards the network, and after, as they say, he bowed down to Trump, I started receiving much more conservative content on my Facebook page, stuff I've never seen before.
Right, interesting. It wouldn't surprise me, but here's the problem.
But
we're speculating
no data. We're speculating right now.
And that's unacceptable. I mean, think about it. This is, billions of people around the world rely on Facebook all the time, and we have no idea what is being pushed down their throat. I don't think that's acceptable in a democracy.
Yeah, I was thinking about exactly like your colleague, whether when Musk is tweeting, and I really believe that he's using Twitter like we are using it. He doesn't have a special, some special way. He just opens, he sits on the toilet, he opens his phone,
yes.
He looks and then he engages on the first tweets that he sees. And his activity, I'm not talking about the Trump endorsement, but like for example, his activity on like local UK issues about far right and grooming gangs, all this stuff. That
Germany,
Romania.
And, he's interfering everywhere.
And so the thought experiment is this activity coming from Musk, or is it coming from the algorithm, which knows that this guy is super popular? It has its own agenda. The algorithm has an agenda to maximize outrage, to maximize engagement, and to fulfill its KPIs. So is it the algorithm that's using Trump to push its agenda and to achieve its goals, or is it Musk who is using the platform to stir up some trouble in the UK?
Wow, he certainly is using the platform to stir things up, and his algorithm ensures.
Where's the agency?
But it's a very interesting problem. Very interesting question. How much agency does Musk actually have, given what he's being spoon-fed by his own algorithm?
And
it's a fascinating question.
The algorithm knows the exact format of the content that he needs to show to Musk. So, for example, stuff about kids. So he knows that Musk engages on stuff about kids. So that's why the grooming gang thing is quite interesting.
It is very interesting.
Let's talk about the prevention. You have developed very interesting research on the concept of inoculation, basically getting vaccinated against disinformation and all this stuff that we were talking about. Could you please elaborate more on how this works?
Yeah, the idea behind inoculation, as you said, is like vaccination. You're trying to create antibodies to misinformation in people's minds. And so what you do is two things. Number one, you warn them that they might be misled. So you alert them to that possibility. And the second thing you do is to say, here is how you might be misled. And then you explain to people how they might be misled. Because misleading information, propaganda, misinformation has fingerprints. It's not perfect, but they're pretty good. So, for example, if something is hyper emotional, if some content is just so outrage evoking that you just want to go out and say, oh, that is very likely to be misinformation or poor quality information, because the people who want to manipulate you, they also know how to manipulate the algorithms, and they know that outrage sells. So they use outrage to whip you up into fear, against immigrants or women, trans people, whatever. Now, we can flip that around. We can teach people. We can say to people, well, if somebody is being that outrage evoking, maybe they are pulling your strings, maybe something's going on here. You're being manipulated. And we've shown repeatedly that, telling people that does allow them to recognize misinformation and to recognize misleading rhetoric. And we have a whole series of training videos. You can see them yourself. You can look at them on inoculation.science. Just go there and
we'll link in the
try them out, see for yourself.
So basically, does it have to do with the pre-bunking concept?
Yes.
Is it the same thing, or there are nuances?
Well, there are nuances, I guess, but to me, inoculation and pre-bunking are sort of near synonyms. That, the whole idea of pre-bunking is that you get to people before they're exposed to the misinformation. And that's what inoculation does. It lets people develop these antibodies, these cognitive antibodies.
And so what do you think? Because this is a kind of a prevention mechanism.
Yes.
What's your opinion on fact-checking and debunking? Because there has been a lot of effort and resources invested in that. How would you evaluate the effectiveness of those efforts?
Okay, well, we know from a lot of studies that debunking works. When I say that, what I mean is that in the majority of cases, for the majority of people, if you correct information that they have just seen and you tell them it's false and you explain to them why it's false and you provide them with an alternative view of the world, then most people will accept that and switch and forget about the original misinformation. So it does work under certain circumstances for most people. Now, obviously, there are some cases when it might not work. There might be a minority of people who say, well, I don't like this. I don't want to be corrected. I'll believe it anyhow. Sure. But on balance, fact-checking works. Now, one problem, when I say that, one underlying problem is that it also depends on how you measure the effectiveness. If you ask people directly whether or not something is false that you have corrected, then they will say, oh, yeah, you told me that's false. It's false. No, I no longer believe that. But the problem is that you still find traces of that information, even after it's been corrected, in what people say and how they answer questions. So, and that's not because people are malicious or anything. It is simply the way our cognitive apparatus functions, that we can update our belief in specific things, but it doesn't follow that we then completely ignore it in the future when we're trying to answer questions.
Yeah, it's really strange how fact-checking started as something that was normal and required in every newsroom.
Sure.
Just like spell checking and proofreading.
Yes.
And it became a completely different discipline, which is associated with a particular political view, and it's made to look evil by politicians. I mean,
well, of course, but then who are the politicians who don't like fact-checking?
Even Zuckerberg said the evil fact-checkers. Well, I understand him, because from his point of view, he's seeing the aggregate bill of all the third-party fact-checking organizations.
Well, yeah, so
he has many zeros and he feels fleeced. I understand him, why he's pissed off.
Yes, his squintillions that he's made out of selling people's attention are not enough for him. I mean, there is a motivation there, I suppose. But two things are important to figure out in this. I mean, the first thing is to ask, who are the politicians who don't like fact checks? Well, guess what? It's the ones who lie all the time. So, Are they really good judges of fact-checking? Well, I don't think so. It's kind of like saying, criminals saying, I don't like the justice system, it's biased against me. Yeah, well, it should be.
It's very funny to observe, for example, in Bulgaria, when politicians who lie less, I would say, when they are fact-checked and disproven, you see the usual suspects, how they actually share that. And they say, you see, this guy lied. But when it's about them,
they'll blame the fact checkers.
They are outraged and they blame the fact checkers. I suppose that it's not a local phenomenon here, but it's interesting to watch.
No, it's spread. Now, the interesting thing is that a few years ago, some colleagues of mine, Jason Reifler and Brendan Nyhan, did a study in the United States with actual legislators ahead of state elections. And what they did was to randomly send a letter to half of the legislators that were up for re-election. And in that letter, they were told, be careful. We have chosen you to be a particular object of our fact-checking because we're focusing on you and we will fact-check you. And the other half of the legislators got a different letter with some, nothing like that. And then turned out that the legislators who had been warned, their reputation was threatened, they lied less. There were fewer violations. The fact checkers didn't pick them up as much as the others. So it worked back then. Now, this was, I can't remember the study. It was pre-Trump. So, 2012, 2013. But back then, fact-checking sent a signal to legislators, and just the threat of being fact-checked kept them more honest.
I think things are different 12 years later.
So. Absolutely.
And if we move back from where we started, like when actually lying doesn't matter if you are authentic and if people relate with your emotions. So in this case, maybe we should emphasize more on the storytelling part in order to engage people.
Yes, I think you have to engage people and you have to develop a counter narrative. And by that, I mean you have to use what is happening and say, develop an alternative story for what's going on. You have to say, well, these guys are lying to you to manipulate you. They're not doing this for you. They're doing this against you. And this is the thing, what's happening in the United States now, that the consequences of Trump's policies are devastating for most of the people who voted for him. They lose health insurance. They have to pay more at the stores because of these tariffs. And,
and the eggs are still expensive. And even
more expensive, far more expensive. So, and I think we have to focus on generally saying, whenever somebody is talking about the people and the elites, any populist is not working for you. They are working for plutocrats or some other, some billionaires, tech bros. They are not working for you. And that is an important narrative to get out. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening for reasons that are also quite mysterious to me, why opposition parties don't, do nothing.
I was going to ask, nobody's saying this. We're hearing it on podcasts, but we're not hearing it from politicians. But I want to ask something else. You said in the interview that you did this afternoon, that there is no such thing as the people. So can you elaborate on that? We'll see how we're going to translate it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very, very important point, because populists talk about the people, and then
which they represent,
of course. And I'm a candidate of the people, and then they talk about the elites, the bad elites. Now, the division between the elites and people is entirely arbitrary. It's drawn wherever the leader thinks it's most advantageous for them politically. Now, usually doctors and scientists are on the side of the elites because, they do inconvenient things like tell you that you should get vaccinated.
Or you should lose weight.
Or you should lose weight. You should stop smoking. My God, drink less.
That's not convenient.
Not convenient at all, let me tell you. No. But what's even more important is that the people don't exist. Why not? Well, because the population is divided into so many different groups that have different values, different interests, different backgrounds, and and that's before you get to immigrants. If you just look at people from the Bulgarians, they're all different from each other. They have different interests depending on their backgrounds. And what democracy is about is to balance this out so no one gets everything they want, but everybody can live with what they get. I mean, that's the democratic politics means to achieve that. The moment you pretend that everybody is the same, you're losing that ability because you're no longer trying to balance competing interests among the population. What you're trying to do is to divide people against each other.
How come these new technologies became so conducive to populism? I know that the concept and it exists since ancient times, and there's always somebody who says they're going to represent the people against the elites. But now it seems popping out of everywhere. I have my own theory, which is that the consumption of content has become intimate, so that you're no longer consuming news and any content even in a family. I mean, with my family, everybody's on their device. Everybody's on their own device with their own feed, and they're consuming their own content. It's even kind of awkward if I take your phone, I start looking at your phone, I feel kind of not right.
Yeah.
So my theory is that has something to do with that.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, it is whatever the algorithms are pushing at people. And again, we've already said, it is favoring emotional content. And of course, populism is all about emotion. So populism thrives on getting people angry. That's how populist leaders get elected. It doesn't thrive on making people happy. It makes them angry. It gives them somebody to be angry at, immigrants usually, or Muslims, or Jews, or Gypsies. There's always somebody, Eskimos. You can always find an outgroup. And that's how populist leaders get elected. And then, of course, they don't fix anything. Quite on the contrary, they're usually extremely bad at governing, as we now see in the United States, but also elsewhere. And that gets people even more angry. So it sort of feeds on itself. And social media isn't the whole story, but it's a big part of the story because the algorithms are favoring that type of inciting information.
And if we touched a bit upon the topic of the prevention and the measures, if we move out of the strategies like pre-bunking, inoculation, which are more on the cognitive, on the psychological side of things. What about policy? It's been quite difficult even to explain to people. For me, it's quite difficult to understand what, for example, the Digital Services Act is, and how Europe is addressing these problems. Although I've been to the United States, I've spoken to lawmakers about the algorithms, for example, why they don't do anything about it, and even they escaped the answer with saying, well, you in Europe you're doing, and we might follow your lead. It was very
I'm really happy
funny
that Europe is doing this. I understand it's a bit more.
I think, well, among some legislators in the US, but there are others, of course, who think, that's censorship.
And that's communism. I mean, we're communists here.
Now, of course, that's completely ridiculous and perverse almost because, the algorithms are already exercising censorship. By devaluing and suppressing certain content and favoring other content over whatever they don't like. And so, there's censorship, if you want to call it that, ongoing on social media all the time, because that's what algorithms do. They suppress certain information and they favor others. Why? Well, to make money for billionaires. And so, that to me is a real problem. And if you're trying to correct that, that's not censorship. That is just bringing the curation problem under democratic control.
And it's said to be undemocratic.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as usual, it's a topsy-turvy world, and the opposite of what populist politicians say is usually true. As a rule of thumb, if you flip it around, then that's usually true. And that, to me, is an important narrative, again, alternative narrative that has to get out there. And unfortunately, it isn't. It isn't being formulated, except perhaps by academics and journalists, but not by the people in politics, by and large.
Well, in the EU, there is quite bold legislation with the DSA and also the sister acts, which are the AI Act, because there is the whole rabbit hole of what AI will do, can do, should do, and how do we even approach it. Data Act, the Data Governance Act, so they are addressing it. I don't know if they will manage to implement it in time. So, for example, in Bulgaria, because the DSA is functioning.
Yes.
But in Bulgaria, we're waiting for the harmonizing legislation. So basically, it's functioning on a European level, but here they cannot get
harmonization is 2 years later. So I mean, if you are proactive, of course, you can do it straight away. But you can't expect from our country.
Well, and it's also it takes time to figure out how to enforce these things, right? I mean, this is all difficult stuff.
And by then, it's already old.
Yes.
This has happened several times already. Also with the platforms. Well, I mean, by then you have generative AI.
Exactly. It's an arms race, really, between, the technology on the one hand and the intent to keep it democratically accountable on the other. And at the moment, democracy is lagging behind.
And also because of Europe and its legislation, which is the boldest one in the world, we are constantly in Europe is being accused of being backsliding, and you see, because of all your legislation, you are not competitive in terms of technology and AI. And we had this conversation with Nico. Actually, do we have to be?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Do we need it?
Honestly, I'm happy that we're not on the bleeding edge of these new technologies and seeing what they do to a naive population. Let's say I'm really happy that somebody else will burn themselves before my society burns itself.
It's a very good point, and certainly one way of looking at it. And also, I actually don't see Europe as being, that far behind even on those technologies, because, Europeans know how to use ChatGPT and
because we didn't invent it. But we have social system, which is kind of nice.
You have very good academics. They build startups in the US, but because the investment climate is different. It's not because there is no funding or no conditions here for innovation. There, but it's just easier to get risk investment in the US.
Yeah, maybe. But okay. Look, I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really comment on the economics of it as much, but. I can comment on these absurdities that J.D. Vance was telling Europeans about, backsliding free speech being imperiled in Europe, when at the same time, the same government in the United States is canceling research grants, right, left and center.
And press access to the White House, which I think is the first time it has ever been done.
And deporting students for
snatching students off the street for exercising
their opinion on the streets, or
right, and silencing academics who are not doing research that the administration wants. So I mean, it is grotesque, and it is an inversion of the truth. And on the one hand, that makes it, in a sense, quite easy to reveal what is going on, because you can say, hey, just turn everything upside down, then you know the truth. So Europe is the place defending democracy. The United States is engaging in censorship. It's the opposite of what Vance is saying and Rubio. So that's easy, in a sense. I mean, I find it quite easy to understand the world. I just turn everything Americans say upside down. And then usually when I check out, whether I'm right, then yes, I'm right,
This is what we were discussing with a colleague, another fellow reporter, that we're getting extremely tired of, you quote somebody and then your next few sentences have to be context which is explaining the opposite. And it's been our job for quite a while already.
But, ultimately the solution, ideally would be that you completely dismiss those voices. don't pay any attention to them, and, deal with reality as it actually is. Now, of course, that's easier said than done because the United States is a very powerful country, and what they do over there doesn't matter. And, if they're now threatening to withhold visas from Europeans who worked on the DSA, I think, that's something you have to take seriously.
Yeah, and when you have Russia on your back door as well.
And that too, of course, who are now no longer any different from not very different from their American counterparts.
Like the J.D. Vance speech kind of rhetoric is actually feeding the local, because here in Europe there's always like a small Trump wannabe, there's a Bulgarian Trump wannabe, and every country has some Trump wannabes, and it's feeding them, and the center, like the EU, is trying to keep it.
Right, but I think there's also an opportunity in this, and the opportunity is to use Donald Trump or the administration, what they're doing in the U.S., as inoculation against European populists.
And I think it's working.
In many places it
working,
is. Yeah, it didn't work in Poland, unfortunately. It worked in Romania. Definitely worked in Canada. I mean, Canada is, I think, very much inoculated.
The polling graph in Canada is insane.
I've never seen anything like it. I know.
We'll show it.
It worked in Germany.
And it worked, not enough, in my opinion. It worked in Australia, though, beautifully. Australians turned against, very much against Trump, and hence against the mini-Trump, the Australian mini-Trump. So, yeah, I think more can be done by Democratic politicians to just point out, how insane things are in the United States. And I use that word, I don't use it lightly because I talk to Americans every day. I have so many friends and colleagues in the U.S. I used to live there. And it's just unbelievable what's happening, and it's not compatible with any form of democracy.
Well, sooner or later there will be a turn, but the consequences will be very, very serious.
Yes, it will take decades to rebuild.
And do you have anything like?
Yeah, I would like to go back to the individual level, because I have a theory that what we're living right now, these crazy times and new technology and all this madness that's going on, it's actually a bit of a generational issue. So, because I still remember when I used to go out, buy newspaper, bring to my parents, and buy cigarettes for myself. So I wasn't that young. I mean, I used to smoke.
You were smoking,
yeah. I used to smoke, so I wasn't that young.
And we were allowed to buy cigarettes for our parents when we were 7. So.
Yeah, also.
In the shops, I remember this period.
Another kind of insanity. And do you observe some generational effects that the kids right now, like the small kids and those the digital natives, the kids that are immersed in this kind of madness, disinfo, narrative, post-modern craziness, are they more robust to this
Well,
this stuff?
That's an interesting question. There's sort of conflicting information on that. The most recent work I know of, meta-analysis by Mubashir Sultan he's in Berlin at the MPI. He showed that older people are actually more accurate at differentiating true from false headlines.
Okay. But they're also more susceptible to misinformation and propaganda, because they're always...
Well, that's the flip side. I mean, if you look at American data, then it is older white males in particular, conservative white males, who are the most infused with misinformation and bad quality content. So I don't think we have a very good answer to that question yet, but it's certainly not the case that young people are impervious to this. They are affected by misinformation. And there's some concerning data about young men being pulled into this whole misogynistic manosphere and these overtly, just misogynist
to their particular emotions that they feel. So a bit more on the countermeasures. So we talked about what's going on in Europe and inoculation, but let's go particular advices. So what can we do, like people who are listening to us right now, the podcast, which are they're quite aware, they know technology, they're listening to Ratio. What can they do to be more robust? And then we'll talk what they can do with the kids, with the old people, and
they might play to their parents.
Yes. Well, I think the first thing to realize is that they're not alone. The majority of people is interested in accurate content. The majority of people in any country we've tested wants there to be content moderation, that is, removing hate speech or misinformation that has adverse consequences for society. So if you're speaking out on behalf of, accurate information and facts, you are in the majority. And I think that's very important to keep in mind because
it doesn't feel that way.
Exactly.
It doesn't feel that way.
It feels lonely.
Precisely. And the reason is that most reasonable people are not shouting.
Yeah.
And the few people who are not reasonable are shouting like mad. And so what happens is that there's a distorted perception of who's in the majority. Sorry, I have a... Oh, God, I've been talking all day and my throat is very dry. Anyway, so, and this is known as, there's a fancy word for it. It's called pluralistic ignorance. And that occurs when the majority feels they're in the minority. And that is very dangerous in a democracy because it means that the majority can be ignored because it's quiet and it doesn't know that it is in the majority. And we have to counter that. I think that is one very important thing to do, and that is to be out there and also add your voice so it doesn't look like the shouters and haters are in the majority, which they're not. Well, that's one thing. The other thing is just protect yourself against being misinformed. So think about what you're looking at before you share it on social media. You don't want to be part of the problem. You want to be part of the solution. The other thing is when it comes to your kids is, monitor what they're doing and have conversations with them. And if you feel that they're beginning to be radicalized or something, then, you have to think about how you might counter that. And that's not easy, but at least, be aware of when this might be happening. And I think right now, the most dangerous source of potential radicalization is from this manosphere, the sort of bizarre male cult of what they call masculinity, but it is actually just being a bad person, really. That's that's the only way I can. You look at some of these characters and what they say, and how much they hate women, and how much they say it's basically okay to dominate and rape women. I mean, hang on, that's not. That's just being a bad person. Don't tell me that that's masculinity. I'm a man. I don't do that. I don't feel that way. So who are they to tell me I'm not masculine? It's completely ridiculous. And I think that's, to me, the most dangerous source of radicalization.
This is a good example of intimate consumption of content, because most guys who are looking at this kind of stuff, they'll be kind of ashamed.
They wouldn't share it verbally, most probably, with somebody. And but they started doing these men circles, etc. And at least I've been trying to monitor. It's not targeting.
How it goes. I mean, here it's just being Balkan,
No. It's already getting there. I mean, there are precise groups. And I've spoken to my friends because I have a girl, but friends of mine who have boys, teenagers, it's going on, and there are local producers of content, which is
I'm sure it's there because
of course, because it works.
Well, there's a market there, and it makes it, at first glance, it makes it very easy for a 13-year-old to think, okay, I don't really have a problem. I just gotta, be aggressive, and then I'm a man.
Especially after the masterminds of this were arrested, and then they were basically evacuated with a private jet with the help of the American president.
Trump, absolutely.
This didn't help a lot as well. Yeah.
No, it did not. Although, again, it's the kind of thing you can then flip it around. You can say, well, look at what this guy's doing. and do you want that here? So the silent majority of people who do not want to be living in a place like America is right now, where people get snatched off the street, they will be sensitive to that kind of messaging and saying, you got to be careful here because otherwise you're going to get Trump.
I have also good advice. It goes like in the inoculation space is to do a parallel between paying for something, paying for content or paying for an app and experiencing emotions. I mean, I pay for a lot of software. Mm-hmm. I build software for a life, so I had no problem to pay for apps and to pay for Patreons and
of course.
Yeah, but when I pay, I do it consciously, and it's the same for emotions. If something makes me angry, I think about it and I say, am I going to give my emotion to this? Maybe there is stuff out there that really makes me angry, and I engage with it.
Unfortunately, there's more and more stuff that is true. We want to believe it's not, but it is.
But a lot of stuff I just don't care. I know that it's supposed to make me angry, and
that's a very important skill to have, and that is something that I think we have to learn more and more, which is to put filters on what we consume online. And one way to do it is to just limit your time with Facebook or Blue Sky or whatever it is, because limiting that time protects your emotions from being hijacked.
Good. So I guess we can come to an end. If people want to find more stuff from you, where should they?
Well, my homepage, lewin.uk, LEWAN.uk, that has all my publications, all my public-facing work, videos, YouTube, the whole thing. It's all there.
Okay, and Blue Sky.
Yes, okay. And on Blue Sky. And
you rage quit Twitter or?
Oh, no, I left Twitter a long time ago, and I'm on Blue Sky now. As are most people I know.
Well, but you still use it for scientific purposes.
Yeah, because they have the data.
Twitter, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you do the research there, but you don't use it as a consumer.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And even doing the research has become increasingly difficult because Musk has removed API access for academics. It used to be free, and now he's trying to charge an arm and a leg.
It's like something like $40,000, crazy amount.
Oh, it's crazy.
Data
of course.
Access.
And I don't know anybody who can afford to pay that. Certainly not an academic.
Great.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure for us too.
Good stuff.
Поздрави, приятели! Стигнахте до края на епизода. Ако все още не сте го направили, абонирайте се за канала, а ако ни слушате в YouTube, щръкнете и върху камбанката след това. Ако нещо ви е направило впечатление и издразнило, ни оставете коментар. Така, освен че ще помогнете да си направим подкаста по-добър, ще дадете и храна на алгоритмите да показват нашето съдържание на повече хора.
Благодарим на нашия спонсор GraphWise, който разработва тук в България страхотна технология, която захранва изкуствен интелект с качествени данни. Ако сте любопитни и искате да научите повече, в бележките има линк към сайта.
Също така, не изпускайте да изгледате и другите подкасти на Рацио. Vox Nihili, в който Стоян, Ставро и Любо говорят за философия, етика и право. Интералия, в който Васко и Ники говорят за изкуство, култура и език. И седмичния подкаст Рацио Weekly, импровизирана научна новинарска емисия, в която Никола и Петко правят обзор на последните новини от света на науката. Не на последно място, най-новата серия за поп-култура PopScript с водещ Благой Иванов.
Ако сте пък в София, заповядайте на някои от събитията на Рацио, където може с питие в ръка да слушате интересни гости и задълбочени теми, както и да се забавлявате на специално подбраната музика в паузите.
Благодарим на студио Астериск на TDB Play, които така търпеливо материализират нашето невероятно съдържание. Нашия продуцент Джоро Батилов и звукорежисьор Явор Пачовски. До следващи срещи!